Yes, we made it through the first week and we are back. This episode we're looking at the male side of things, looking at both the Australian and New Zealand leaderboard. Hey, if you're in Asia and you're thinking, hey, when do I get my turn? I promise that is coming. We're going to do a bit of a show on like a Asia wrap-up type thing, have a look at all the national champs from Asia. This time right now in the CrossFit Games season is a pretty unique time. We're not going to have anything like this again. The reason I say that is because next season the Open is going to be the very first thing that happens, right? This season it's a unique thing where the Open has happened post some sanctional events, and then we've got more sanctionals to come. So the reason I'm prefacing our discussion about the males with that is that there's a fair bit up in the air at the moment. Like, we don't quite know who's going to go team. We don't quite know who has qualified through the Open and who hasn't. So I've done my best to do my research. I'll let you know what the state of play of things is right now. Understand that that could change significantly between now and further sanctional events, or between now and the CrossFit Games. Why don't we start with the Australian men's leaderboard? Let's look at our top 10. And there's some really familiar names on this leaderboard, and then there's also some people that are in up in the top 10 that perhaps we haven't seen before. In 10th place, well, that's a very familiar name, isn't it? Brandon Swan. James Newbury, who of course has a ticket already to the CrossFit Games, is in 9th. Luke De Jong, the 19-year-old, is in 8th place. Khan Porter in 7th, Rob Forte in 6th, Matt McLeod in 5th. Royce Dunn had an excellent Open in 4th spot, and I say that purely because we know that perhaps the Open is not his style of competition, not his favourite style of competition. Then we've got Zeke Grove in 4th, DLL, as he's known on the internet, or Dean Linda-Layton in 2nd, and then Baden Brown in 1st place. So Baden Brown at this stage will be going to the CrossFit Games through being the top of the Australian leaderboard. And you know what, we're going to get to Braden, but why don't we start in a position where we look at some of the old, athletes that have been to the CrossFit Games before. Let's have a look at James Newbury. And this was a bit of again, he was in that scenario of he's already qualified for the CrossFit Games as an individual through the Australian CrossFit Champs. So it was a matter of what did he need to do in the Open? Well, technically nothing, but we do know that he had to complete the 5 workouts. We saw him throw down at 19.2 at the announcement. And in that particular workout, he actually managed the exact same score as he did in 2016. What was interesting though that day is that James did comment that he was really happy with the score because of the stage of training he was in. And I think what he was referring to there is that previously, during the Open, he'd probably been absolutely peaking in order to, 1, qualify for regionals, and then 2, be prepared at regionals. This year, he knows that he needs to peak at the Games, so he said that he was really happy to get the same score given that his training was in a different phase. Look, James did better than he did last year in the Open, but he's had some really strong previous years that he didn't do quite as well at. So if we look at 2017, he came 2nd in Australia, and 2016, he came 3rd in Australia. And look, it makes total sense. There's other people to which the Open meant more this year than it would have for James. So for him to still finish in the top 10, I think was an excellent effort. And, I'd really like to see James take that next step at the CrossFit Games. I think we all would. He's such a likable character and he's put in the work. His progression to get to where he is now has been very, very solid and systematic. He's been the regional champion the last 2 years. And both times when he was the regional champion, for mine, and I was fortunate enough to witness it on the floor, he was so clearly the best athlete over that weekend. So I would love to see, and I think he's capable of jumping huge spots at the CrossFit Games. Don't be surprised if you see James Newbury in sort of the top 20, even top 10 this year at the CrossFit Games. That would be a real feather in his cap and something I think he deserves. Okay. Let's talk about Rob Forte and what a decorated CrossFitter he is. He's been going to the CrossFit Games since 2011 when he qualified for the first time as an individual. Last year, for the first time ever, he went team. Now, I reckon if Rob was trying to qualify for an individual spot, his best bet was probably through the Open. In previous years, he's actually been very close, if not in the top 20 of the Open, on a number of occasions. If you just take a look at his worldwide finishes in the Open. And since they were ranked by country, in 2016 he finished 10th in the world, and then in 2017 he finished 21st in the world. Now I know that it's top 20 that's taken, but I'm going to put to you that somebody in the top 20 may not have gone to the CrossFit Games in 17. So on 2 out of the last 3 Opens, Rob would have qualified as a top 20 place getter worldwide. This year, it's not to be. And it looks like Rob is going team. It's interesting to see what the play is there, because his team, which he'll throw down with at the Down Under Championship, consists of Maddie Sturt, James Newbury, and Caitlin Van Zyl. Now, Caitlin Van Zyl has already put on Instagram that she would still go individual if after the Open reshuffles, she qualifies individual. And then we know that Maddie and James are going individually. Now, my understanding right now about the team scenario is the following. If the team qualifies, it can change members for the CrossFit Games. It can change 2 members, and those 2 members have to be 1 male and 1 female. As in, you can't swap out both females or both males. If Caitlin Van Zyl qualifies for the CrossFit Games, and we know Maddie already has, then that team can't be replaced with other individuals. But if Caitlin doesn't, and Rob and Caitlin stay in that team, they could bring in another male and another female. But of course, this is all based on the prospect of them winning the Down Under Championships. However, that is a very, very strong team. So, as it stands right now, the way that I see Rob going to the CrossFit Games in a team is that team wins Down Under Championships. Caitlin Van Zyl doesn't qualify as an individual for the Games. James and Maddie come out, and then 2 others, a male and a female, come into that team, and that team goes to the CrossFit Games. Now, they're going to have to get over Project X, who are also going to the Down Under Championships, but Project X have already got a ticket to the Down Under Championships. So I'm going to review the teams more. The reason I'm discussing this so much is because it looks like, again, in 2019, if Rob's at the CrossFit Games, he will be going team. I can't really see another way for him to get there individually unless he goes to a sanctional event. What a decorated CrossFitter he's been over many years. I, for one, would love to see him at the CrossFit Games again. I would love to see him as an individual as well. But we're actually going to catch up with Rob in a few weeks' time. So we'll get where his head's at on that one soon enough. Let's talk about Royce Dunn. And, Royce Dunn last year at the CrossFit Games, I think everyone in the Australian community really wanted to see him do well, and we all knew who he was. And then he went and won the CrossFit Total and sort of made a bit of a name for himself. I, for one, would love to see Royce back at the CrossFit Games. Now, he hasn't managed to do it through the Open. He's not going to get there when there's a reshuffling of the top 20 worldwide. He's finished 4th in Australia, which I mentioned at the top of the show. You wouldn't think that the Open sort of favours his strength. Like, he's literally a strong dude. And there wasn't even a 1RM lift in this year's Open like there was last year. So to finish 4th is remarkable. I believe he's getting better and better. Well, that's what the results would suggest anyway. Now, he went team at the Australian CrossFit Champs with CJ Walker, April Herring, and Jamie Goodwin. That team finished on the podium. I'm unsure if that team is going back to the Down Under Championships. If it does, it certainly would give the Rob Forte team we mentioned previously a real run for its money, and could be up for the podium again. So what does Royce need from here? Well, if he's going to go individually, he needs to win a sanctional event from here. So certainly it's not beyond him. Like, with the way that he performed last year at regionals, that was just, for mine, that was so remarkable. Like, I knew that he would do well last year in regionals in certain events, like Linda, obviously, being such a strong dude. But when I saw him do so well in the gymnastics event with the muscle-ups and the handstand walking over the obstacles, that's when I thought, we're looking at a CrossFit Games athlete here. So let's hope he can get back. It's a bit of a stretch from here to see him getting back, but I'd love to see him there. Now, Zeke Grove had his best Open yet, following on from his best CrossFit Games yet last year. Now, Zeke won't be at the Down Under Championships. However, he is competing in the Asian Championships at the end of April. He'll need to win that if he wants to go back to the CrossFit Games, and that'll be a big ask with people like Fikowski going there. But certainly would be excellent to see Zeke return to the CrossFit Games for a 4th time. Hey, do you know what? I sort of glossed over two ex-Games athletes from multiple years, Khan Porter and Brandon Swan. I will go over those gents more in the team episode that I do. It does certainly seem like those gents are going to stick together as Project X, and we'll see them at the Games. I can't see that changing. So they had great opens. Brandon finished 10th and Khan finished in 7th. So, absolute champs. Been to the CrossFit Games multiple times. Khan threw down at 19.5 and he redid that workout actually and did a lot better as well. So much respect to those lads. Looking forward to seeing those guys at the Games. Okay, let's talk about Dean Linda Layton. And you know what? Linda Layton finally got to the CrossFit Games last year. And I say finally because, I think there was a lot of people that recognised that he had the talent to be a CrossFit Games athlete. And then it just didn't quite come together on any one regional. There was a few things that happened. I don't want to hash over them too much because they're in the past, but in 2014, I believe it was, the weekend started with a 1 RM hang snatch, of which he should do very well. He's a beautiful lifter. And he missed all 3 attempts, and that was the end of his regionals there and then. And I think a lot of people thought he would actually qualify that year. Then in a few years after that, there was just like 1 or 2 mistakes in workout, and he would always just finish on the bubble. Last year at regionals, Dean had a fantastic 3-day competition. He looked so calm, so complete. New coach, new programming, and he came second at regionals, and he was so clearly the one of the top 5 athletes. And then he had an excellent CrossFit Games. He finished in the top 20. He won an event, and he won an endurance event. I don't know if I was silly to be surprised by that, but just I know he has a background in that type of stuff, but just with the amount of lifting and his strength, I was just so surprised to see him win the endurance event with the running and the swimming. But I was super happy for him. I'm a big Dean Linda Layton fan. I think he could do excellent things at the CrossFit Games. Look, he finished second this year in the Open to Baden Brown, who we'll talk about in a moment. Geez, it was close. In the last week going in, I was thinking to myself, this is Dean's type of workout, the thruster pull-up workout, and he won it. And I'm not surprised by that at all. He won the Australian leaderboard for that one, but Baden came 4th, and it wasn't enough for him to bridge the gap. So Baden has qualified as the national champ. Dean has not. However, if you check the leaderboard as it stands right now, when you take out the national champs of the top 20, it looks like at the moment Dean is going to go to the CrossFit Games by finishing in the top 20 of the CrossFit Open. We also know that there's a number of top 20 people, well, not a number, but there's at least a few that could come out. So I'm referring to, for example, Rich Froning. We know he's going team with CrossFit Mayhem, we hope. So will he go to the Games as an individual? Now that's an interesting question. If Mayhem don't qualify, would Froning go as an individual? I don't think he would, but anyway, nonetheless, I digress. I think the point is this: it looks like Dean's going to the Games at this point. So right now we've got 3 CrossFit Games men: Newbury, Linda Layton, and of course Baden Brown. What's Linda Layton capable of? You know what? Like some of the stuff that Linda Layton puts up on Instagram, you think to yourself, this dude could win the CrossFit Games. And I'm actually going to say that that's not out of the realms of possibility. I mean, we know who's at the top. We know the quality there. But he's starting to put together all the different pieces that he's shown. He is going to compete at the Down Under Championships. I'd love to see him win it, even if he's got a qualifying spot there. I'd love to see him make a bit of a statement. We've got some internationals coming over. I'll give you a sneak peek on who they are in a later show. But I'd love him to win it. And it's his hometown. He trains in Wollongong. So let's see what Linda Layton can do, both at the DUCC and also the CrossFit Games, if he gets there, and it's looking very likely that he will. All right, Baden Brown. Let's talk about it. Our national champ. A few people might be surprised by this, but I know that those that are close to him or have seen Baden compete in the flesh probably are not. I suppose the thing that is slightly surprising, if you will, is that the top 10 is just littered with CrossFit Games athletes from yesteryear, and he's never been to the CrossFit Games, and he's on top of all of them. So maybe that just speaks to the caliber of the athlete. So let me tell you a little bit about Baden. Last year at regionals, he was so close to qualifying. He was in that 6th spot, and I talked earlier in the show, it was a miraculous comeback from Zeke Grove on day 3, and who he bumped out of spot was Baden Brown. Now, Baden competed earlier this year in the Dubai Fitness Champs, and I would say, without going into too deep an assessment, that's the highest quality male field that we've seen at a sanctional, and he finished 20th in that. Now, I think the experience that he would have got from that can't be underestimated in terms of maybe making him quite hungry for it. You know, he got to compete against Matt Fraser in that weekend. Like, what an experience that would be for somebody who's never been to the CrossFit Games before. So how did he do it? Well, he only held off Dean by a few points, but he was super consistent. If you look at his stats, in 19.1 fourth, 19.2 first, 19.3 third, 19.4 eighth, and 19.5 fourth again. So unbelievably consistent. Lowest placing 19.4. Look, this is unconfirmed, but a little birdie told me that he actually did 19.4. That's the snatch burpee, 3 minutes rest, then burpee bar muscle up. A little birdie told me that he actually had to do that workout multiple times because he was sick as a dog, and he actually had to do it just before the cutoff. That is unconfirmed, so if somebody knows something I don't, please let me know. But he's hungry. That's what that tells me. Like, he's really, really hungry. He wants to go to the CrossFit Games, and like, that sounds silly. Who wouldn't when you've got his set of skills? But I reckon what we're looking at here is somebody who could come in as a rookie and really rock the boat. He's got a massive following from people from Townsville. I've got one mate from Townsville, and he was on Baden Brown the whole Open, just telling me that he's going to win this thing. And he was also talking to me about Baden during the ACCC, the ACCC, the Australian CrossFit Champs, because Baden came second there to James Newbury. And this was the thing that people were saying. Well, if Baden comes second at the Australian CrossFit Champs to James, and then James wins the national championship, then Baden will go as the invite from the ACCC. Well, Baden just cut out the middleman, and he just won the Open anyway. Look, we're going to find out more about him. He put all his Open workouts on YouTube. They're super impressive to watch. He moves beautifully. And like I said, he was super consistent over the Open. I'd love to see him at a sanctional event before he goes to the Games. But I don't know if we will see him at another one, because he's done the ACCC and he's done Dubai. So that's 2 already. It'll be interesting to see what he thinks is appropriate between now and the Games, but would love to see Baden there. That sort of ties off on who's going to the CrossFit Games this year as an individual and who's going next year. I want to give a little shout out, not a little shout out, but I want to pay some respect to a few other people that were around the high positions in the Australian leaderboard, in particular 2 young guns that we're going to see at the DUCC. And that's Jay Crouch from Reebok CrossFit Frankston. If you've been following his progress, he competed last year, or he's competed in the Frankston team a few years, and then he was in the team last year that did quite well at the CrossFit Games. What we see time and time again is that that's a very natural progression. Do well in a team and then make the step forward as an individual. I spoke to him. He's pumped to make his debut at the DUCC. Look, I reckon that fella can make a big impact at the DUCC. Don't be surprised if he's being mentioned on that 3rd day as somebody who could, potentially get on a podium, maybe even qualify. The other one is Luc de Jong. He's only 19 years old. You're going to hear this name a lot more. Unsure exactly what his plans are at this stage, but I'd love to see him at another sanctionals event, or at a sanctionals event, I should say, and to see what he's capable of. So 2 youngsters that are worth keeping an eye on. Matt McLeod, he continues his rise throughout the Australian CrossFit scene. So close to qualifying for the Games last year, going into day 3 of regionals. He's climbed from 28th in Australia in 2017 in the Open to 7th last year to 5th this year. It's the progression we tend to see to an athlete that goes to the Games. Again, though, he finds himself in this scenario of he's going to have to win a sanctionals event. I wouldn't count him out, but it's a big ask, especially given the international names that we have coming over. All right, let's jump over the pond and have a look at the New Zealand side of things. And geez, there's some really fierce competitors on that New Zealand leaderboard. Let's have a look at our top 10. In 10th place, Dylan Matai. In 9th, Adam Morgan. In 8th place, Rob Watt. I was somewhat surprised by that. Rob's performance at regionals last year was very, very impressive. Then we've got Michael McCarty, Ben Jansen, Luke Waterhouse, Tremaine Jensen, who he's been occupying a lot of top spots in the local Aussie scene. He lives in Melbourne. James Connew and Hayden Wolfsbauer take 3rd and 2nd. They're regional stalwarts. And then in top spot and making his CrossFit Games debut as an individual will be Luke Fiso. I actually had an interaction with Luke only a few months ago when I was in New Zealand. What a lovely fella he is. Absolutely stoked that he'll be going to the CrossFit Games. He's a beast. He moves really, really well. And, in terms of where he finished this year, if we pull up Luke's stats, what we can see is that he had a really good open and he won 19.2 in New Zealand. So that definitely went a long way to taking him towards first spot. His worst finish was the following week in 19.3, where he finished 12th. Now, he's come first in New Zealand every year since 2016 after the Open. So for me, this is some real justice for Luke. Like, it'd be really annoying if he came first in the 3 years where you didn't really count for much, and then this year he got knocked off. So for him to finish first for mine, it's just like that's the type of people we want getting to the CrossFit Games, and absolutely pumped for Luke. Best of luck, mate. I hope you go well. Okay, so I guess the question that really needs to be answered in relation to the New Zealand top 10 is who's going to try and go team at a sanctional event or who's going to go individual. There's some people that I'd really like to see make their regionals debut themselves on Wollongong, if you will. Tremaine Jensen, I mentioned him before, been pretty prominent in the local CrossFit scene in Melbourne, where he's living. I think he's the caliber of a sanctionals or regionals level athlete. I would really like Rob Watt to go individual as well. The reason I say that is that he's just so strong. So perhaps at that sort of sanctional style workout, he's going to have a somewhat of an advantage, and he did so well at the regionals last year. And then we've got James Connew and Hayden Wolfsbauer, who I feel like regionals wouldn't be the same without those guys. They've just been individual competitors for such a long time. Hayden Wolfsbauer is a ripping character. I remember last year at regionals, he jumped on the assault bike in the chipper when he was a decent way behind and just started thrashing that thing. Like, it wasn't the smart play, but the crowd was loving it. So I love seeing characters like that at regionals or at sanctional events. So I'm very much hoping that we'll see those boys there. Who else might we see? Michael McCarty, he's in the top 10. I would love for him to be there as an individual. And then Kevin Manuel. Kevin Manuel, old school New Zealand CrossFitter, such a beast. He's finished outside the top 10 in New Zealand. Doesn't mean that he can't earn an invite to one of the sanctional events. So it'd be cool to see him back on the Wollongong floor. Of course, a CrossFit Games competitor from previous years. All right, team, that's the end of episode 2, wrapping up the male side of things of the Australian and New Zealand leaderboard. We'll be looking at Asia very, very shortly. In the meantime, keep converting those pounds to kilos.